Hello and welcome to the fifth in our series of sessions on an introduction to artificial intelligence. We've had a beginner session, an intermediate session, an advanced session. Last week we had it focused on XKool and LookX, and today we're looking at text to video. We've got two more sessions. Next week we have a panel discussion involving Patrick Schumacher, Ross Lovegrove, Wanyu He, and many others. And we finish off with an all-female session, Emerging Voices in AI. Many of you will remember that we, sorry, let me just simply say that for the session today, we have a very distinguished lineup of colleagues joining us. Daniel Bolojan from the Florida Atlantic University, and also Corp Himmelblau. He's been working on the Deep Himmelblau project. Tim Fu, formerly of Zahidid Architects, now Studio Tim Fu, someone who needs no introduction. He's become a bit of an online celebrity. Jason Taylor, who is a professor at Manchester School of Architecture in England, and has been involved in testing out Sora, as indeed has Tim Fu. So today, this is less a tutorial as such, more a kind of question of reflecting on the emergence of these text to video platforms, which are getting more and more multiple. Perhaps the primary three is Sora, although hasn't been released yet, Runway Gen 3, and Luma, but there are many others that are appearing on the scene. It's becoming a bit of a crowded market. But the big question right now is, where is Sora? You will recall that Sora was announced, shall we say, back in February of this year. It's just going to put my it was heralded, and there was a huge excitement about what it would be able to do. And very soon after the announcement, we held a session on the 9th of March involving Daniel Bolojan and a range of other digital futures tutors and panelists and so on, to speculate about what was going to happen. And at that time, we'd seen some remarkable videos, possibly cherry-picked, but this one was remarkable because it seems to understand the physics of liquid, 2 galleons in a coffee cup. And we got extraordinary series of clips that were sort of tantalizing in the way that they suggested possibilities. Clearly a game changer in terms of text to video. Text to video had been around since late 2022, but this was something completely different. And the astonishing level of detail in this face is remarkable, as indeed is this close-up of the eye. Something had arrived that was really turning heads. And it wasn't as though it was completely perfect. In this short video, we see a cat with 3 legs appearing. There we go. There were still glitches to be found. At the same time, there was something tantalizing that was clearly changing, raising the bar in terms of text to video. This chameleon, unable as yet to change color, but let's hope we will soon have chameleons being chameleons and changing color. And perhaps the most remarkable or one of the most remarkable, this moorhen that was really presenting itself as though it had a very good grasp of 3D. I mean, apart from the exquisite detail of the crest of this bird, as soon as it turns its head, you see what a remarkable grasp of 3D that it has. Does this mean that Sora is heading towards a full understanding of 3D? And of course, there's examples of architecture. This kind of a scene from the Wild West in color. This again, ancient architecture, where again you'll notice that if you look closely, you'll see some people going into into the barricades, into the parapet. Things weren't quite working too well. This one too. Oops. This one too. I'm not sure we get Sakura in when there's snow out there. It doesn't seem to be working very well. But what we discovered is that again they cut this clip short when this couple appeared to be about to crash through something. Clearly it had been cherry picked and they'd edited out. At this point here, suddenly they stop it. Okay. But what this was able to do, I mean, the point about this is Sora was trained in a very similar way to the large language models. And instead of having tokens based on words, it was using patches based on videos. And it was based on a huge, huge amount of data. And like the large language models, it seems to be displaying emergent capabilities. These are capabilities that that are displayed that haven't been on which the system hasn't been trained. In the case of ChatGPT, it was never trained to write code. It was never trained to translate languages, and yet it could. What we find in these is things like occlusion. Occlusion is when a scene disappears from the frame and comes back in. Here we have a sort of suburban railway journey in Tokyo, I guess, and suddenly, bam, we lose it, and then it comes back. That the background image of these suburban buildings disappears out of the shot right now and then comes back in. This is truly remarkable. So alongside its grasp to its seemingly very strong grasp of 3D, we're seeing occlusion occurring. This was perhaps the one that the video that stood out most, because it was able to maintain consistency to up to 60 seconds. Indeed, it was the only one released that lasted 60 seconds, suggesting that it was the only one that could last 60 seconds. What we're seeing here is a young lady walking through the streets of Tokyo, and when we get close up to a close up of her face, you realize the exquisite detail that you can find in these videos. It really is remarkable. Look at that, the quality of the video. Now, Sora still hasn't been released. We were expecting it in September or certainly before October, and it hasn't been released. This is the big question. Why has Sora not been released? But alongside this, other platforms such as Runway have been developed. Runway Gen 3 is out there, and I've been experimenting with that. Now, you can't do 60 seconds. That's very clear. But you can do something that for a much shorter clip does look something similar. I took the prompt for this and run it on Runway, and then because they're all fragmentary, I put them together using putting it online and syncing it into some music, so it kind of appears as a totality. So this is just simply using sorry. Well, before I do that, let me just go and mention this. Sorry. Yes, when it appeared, there was an immediate outcry. People are saying this is astonishing. Look what it can do. The day after, this character appeared, showing how he could use these characters as avatars and do something.
Visual media has just changed forever. This video behind me is fully AI generated using Sora by the company OpenAI. There's not a single live action element in there. That was from a text prompt. I put the prompt in the description. Now what I just did is I took that video that's fully AI generated and I ran it through Wonder Studio. And this is a tool that actually lets you animate full CG characters, replacing them with live action subjects. And so, normally this would be real life footage, but instead it's AI generated video, but yet I'm still getting full on motion capture data and I'm getting a full 3D rig. Now, Wonder Dynamics lets you bring in your own CG characters. So this could be any model, any subject that has a bone system and a rig, but this has tremendous implications for the media industry. Things will never be the same. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts on this?
Exactly.
Visual.
And it had a huge impact on the industry itself. Very shortly afterwards, Tyler Perry halts a plan to develop an $800 million studio expansion after the shock of seeing Sora. So we were all stunned by Sora and left waiting for the launch of the thing. Meanwhile, of course, it was able to do architecture as well. This is an interior, not so special, perhaps in terms of its aesthetics, but nonetheless, it maintains consistency for a good 20 or so seconds, which suggests that it is quite capable of producing some remarkable videos in the future. So taking the prompt for this one and putting it on Runway, I was able to achieve the following: fragments that are somehow collaged into a video using Instagram. Here we go. So clearly not as good, but getting not far away. But you can also just change it to traditional. Those of you who've worked with Runway will find that actually it's very difficult to control these characters. In the previous clip, I tried to get them to take sunglasses off, and they were putting sunglasses on. I tried to get them to turn to the left, and they turned to the right. In other words, control was really quite an issue. We don't know, of course, whether that same issue applies also to Sora, but we can surmise that maybe it is. So you kind of go with what you can get. So the question ultimately is, what can you do in terms of architecture? And here's a glimpse of that using the same technique. So what we're seeing is a tool that is designed to produce videos being used to generate architecture. A whole new chapter has potentially opened up, not just text to video, but as it were, text to animated architecture. Seeing the world of architecture in a performative way, seeing it colonized by human beings, and seeing it, as it were, choreographed with individuals. So these other platforms have seemingly caught up. But what has happened to OpenAI? There has, of course, been a whole saga of different issues going on involving OpenAI. The letter that was published by the Future of Life Institute asking, that was based on the kind of the concern that these platforms were doing remarkable things, but we were not controlling them. We were just throwing ourselves into a future with no concern for safety. And this led to this letter launched by Max Tegmark, the Future of Life Institute, with people like Stuart Russell and Elon Musk signing it. The letter had no effect at all. Well, what do you expect? When Microsoft and Google, as has been pointed out, are competing against each other, are they going to slow down? Would the two leaders in the Olympic marathon slow down? Of course not. It would allow their competitors to catch up. But what was remarkable after this, that Elon Musk, having signed this letter to go and say, let's slow down, decides he's going to do the opposite. He is going all in on a supercomputer. The cluster called Colossus is going to be the biggest such platform in the world. We are going to see extraordinary things happening, but it's as though there are no brakes now. We are on a runaway train with no brakes, being propelled into a future, a very uncertain future. Then there was the issue of Elon Musk suing AI, accusing it of putting profit before humanity. OpenAI was set up as a non-for-profit platform that was meant to compete against profit-based platforms like Google. But what happened, of course, is that Microsoft entered into a deal and gradually started taking over OpenAI. Musk sues OpenAI and then abruptly withdraws the lawsuit against Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, and OpenAI. And then, even more bizarrely, he sues OpenAI again, alleging deceit of Shakespearean proportions. What on earth is going on? It's as though Silicon Valley has been turned into a soap opera. And of course, we do have a television Netflix series on Silicon Valley, but somehow the reality is even stranger than the fictional Netflix series. Then we have the issue of Sam Altman himself being fired from OpenAI, another saga within this soap opera, and which commonly believed it was Ilya Sutskever who had been responsible for this coup, concerned about safety and the fact that we were just throwing ourselves headlong into this future without any concern for that. He basically was the whistleblower who raised the alarm. But what happened? Well, Sutskever lost out. OpenAI reinstates Sam Altman with considerable pressure, no doubt, from Microsoft. And suddenly we were back to normal. But Ilya Sutskever was, in a sense, forced to leave. He then set up a company on safe superintelligence with two colleagues, and the debate continues. But it's not as though OpenAI has itself survived intact. First of all, the team that was looking at safety has been disbanded. But then there are issues that are continuing to plague the company, with Sam Altman being put on the back foot. All of a sudden, most of OpenAI's most prominent employees started leaving. So here is the team with Sutskever on the right, and now is the team on now. It's effectively just Sam Altman. And then just yesterday, the co-lead in Sora leaves for Google. Remarkable. So what are we going to make of all this? What are we going to make of this soap opera that's going on? What we know for certain is that we haven't seen Sora hasn't been released. There's as much mystery about that as anywhere. What we do know, of course, is that these other platforms are catching up. Are we going to see a repeat of the saga that happened with DALL-E, where Midjourney seized the opportunity, and we were and OpenAI was left behind? Today, we're going to be bringing in some distinguished colleagues, then two of whom have had experience of using Sora, even though it hasn't been released to the public yet, to talk about what this is going to lead to, what are we going to make of what's happened, less a tutorial and more a kind of sharing of ideas, a sharing of perspectives on the future of text to video. I want to invite Tim Fu to share his screen. Tim, I bump into Tim all over the world, in London, in Venice, in Canada, where he trained himself, in Toronto. Tim, it's great to see you. Welcome.
Thanks, Neil. It's a pleasure as well. Um, Go ahead, share the screen. All right. Right. Thanks for this invitation. I think it's a very funny coincidence that a long time ago, when Midjourney started, Digital Futures was the first platform I showcase our first findings with text to image AI. And now with text to video, again, Digital Futures, you've invited me when we just started to heavily experiment with AI video software. So it's quite interesting for us as well to be able to showcase a new aspect of where AI is going. So yeah, since last 2 years and now we've grown into a team. Studio Tim Fu is an office that I run now in London. And we are I would say, an elite team of architects and designers focused on the design side of using artificial intelligence as a technology. We also focus on various tech developments and things related to AI research. And we hope to try to bring this technology more into the practice as we continue. So just 2 weeks ago, I was at the United Nations General Assembly event, 79th, and I was invited by Meta to discuss with foreign policy on the rights and issues with regarding copyright and AI. And I think this is a very big step for us to take and start talking about it in the creative industry, who we are and how do we think about AI. And from here on, in a way, as they call me, an evangelizer of I do believe in showcasing the technology in its full use and being able to apply it to design and the practice. And the values that it holds is much more substantial than the potential destruction of what you would presume as private property and things that is debatable, whether or not certain elements of AI is copyright infringement. So that's a can of worms of debate that we could go into in another webinar session. But from my perspective, I wholly support its use as a tool for architectural and design exploration. So, in the video generation with AI worlds, it's quite new, but it's also become quite abundant in its possibilities, and the players are now coming along out of the woodwork, various different types of AI, as Neo has mentioned already. So, the timeline from 2022 to now, we've seen the surgence of AI image tools, and it reached a uncanny level of realism and it began to plateau. And that is what we've seen with the last runs of Midjourney and DALL-E. And more so recently, the video AI world is taken this rocket ship of Moore's law multiplied by two. I would say it's improving even faster than the way diffusion 2D models have been improving. So it's very astounding to see this level of improvement in such a short time. And we can see from then to now, I will showcase some of the works that we've been doing from this process. But just before that, we've also been experimenting with AI prior. Let me just turn the volume down a little bit. We've been experimenting with AI video, quote unquote, prior to the video models. So these are generated using pure images, diffusion model, and then frame by frame stitched together. So the idea of being able to do that is so that we're able to actually utilize this model for studying parametric algorithms and designing, utilizing algorithmic methods. So there is a lot of functional aspects to using AI video that we've been experimenting even prior to these video models. But now we have video models, and our tech team especially have been researching and running experiments and observations. For example, we have Luma here. If you type the text prompt, A young woman in a flowing white dress walks gracefully towards a modern building inspired by a grand piano featuring smooth curved lines, sleek black exterior, and large glass windows that reveal a sophisticated interior. You'll notice it doesn't actually showcase so much of the piano. So there are some limitations to Luma as of yet. Well, with Runway, we get a bit more realism, but you can also see that with Runway, it doesn't show the piano, doesn't exactly listen to the prompt, especially the more creative aspects of the prompts. And comparatively, with Sora, we're really able to get the finesse. We're able to get the interpretation of the piano as a building. So we like to really prompt these very specific elements in order to test out the possibilities and the accuracies of these AIs. Here's another prompt. Instead of the woman in the piano, we just change it to be in the interior of a luxury yacht, admiring the stunning sunset and large glass windows. Here you can see that Luma does portray more realistically, but there is not so much of the complexities that we're looking for when it comes to the organic yacht command. Whereas Runway provides that certain realism, but we also feel that in terms of morphological variations and creativity, it falls short of just being rather traditional. And then with Sora, you can see that it does actually start to merge organic ideas into this yacht interior. And the way it portrays the woman's movement is a lot more realistic than the twirling woman in Runway or the very stiff model in Luma. So we find that it has a very dynamic understanding of both your text prompt as well as the behavior of the human. And here's another one walking through an atrium with striking patterns. Luma fails to deliver the atrium altogether, whereas Runway delivers it, but there are some inaccuracies and you would say some flaws in the way it's delivering the geometry. And finally, we have Sora. I would say so far from that time I've tested, Sora was far superior to the rest. As you can see, it's uncanny, as in at first glance, you're really unable to tell that this is AI generated. And the architecture is also rather stunning. So now to showcase these ideas more fully fleshed, I will switch to video and showcase the full work that I've done with Sora. So Sora, OpenAI approached me to be a one of the collaborating artists, utilizing my design ethos from the time I worked as a Hadid to the time I started my practice. I wanted to experiment the organic expression as a possibility with the interiors as well as exteriors. But the way Sora is able to handle human behavior was immaculate and stunning to a point where I decided to create an entire video that focuses on both those aspects, the human movement, as well as the way the geometries can vary from interior to interior, just to showcase the full possibilities of it. We're at a point where it's hard to spot certain elements as artificial, but of course, anytime you look carefully, you will always see it, especially from the movement of their fingers to the way the geometries don't behave normal. And here's some experiments with exterior as well. I find it has elegance to the way it treats geometry, but it also fell short to what we deem as the final versions that we have in our own perspective. So that is for Sora. Next, we have Runway, which I believe, although not as powerful, what Runway can do is you can insert image. So these are image to video AI. And I have to say, comparing Sora to this, Sora is terrible at converting from image to video. So that's quite unfortunate. So we have been using other AIs to continue our design process, namely with Midjourney implemented on Runway. So generated visuals as a single frame and then ran as a video by Runway. So that is Runway. After that, we also have Luma. So Luma, I've also worked on a few projects such as these were concepts for real projects that we're working on. It helps to deliver the idea as a snapshot, and I would say it's just falls slightly short of Runway's capabilities, but at the same time, it's able to really deliver a certain aspects of realism. So here is an example of utilizing Luma. Okay, these video keep jumping back and forth, so hopefully you guys will be able to understand. Now here, this particular one is not Luma. After the study of Luma, we try to use other methods to create video. And for this one, it is called Immersity, which is actually using an image and then a depth map algorithm. So based with neural network, it learns the depth map and then creates this zoom image. So what this gives you is complete accuracy to the original image, but it's not technically a video in the traditional sense. It is a pan, a sort of tilt shift, a parallax effect of the original image. But we find this one to be quite useful in showing clients some of our projects in this process. And then finally, with this idea, we push further and we develop ideas. Namely, you can see from some of the Instagram works that I've done, these are purely done with image AIs and then run on Immersity. So with this method, you can see that it's absolutely accurate and absolutely high definition. There is no jittering, no temporal inconsistency. So the only thing that falls short is it's not able to fully map out the 3D. So we have some strengths and weaknesses with Immersity. So that is what I've been working on for the last few sessions. And just recently, we've actually stumbled upon this newest version of AI developed by a Chinese company, and it's called Kling. So with Kling, we've actually reached, I believe, maximum quality. So here's what we have with Kling. So with this video, you can actually see that it really coheses all the elements together. Sadly, probably the quality of the video does not go through this video webinar, but we're running this at like 3,000 pixels. And if you look at the video, the raw video in real time, it's absolutely crisp when it comes to the resolution. And you can see the way the dresses move, the way the humans move. You might have a missing finger or two, but at least overall, it's just astounding when it comes to the quality compared to the last few models. So that's where we are when it comes to the AI videos. And beyond that, I want to discuss also what's next. Where are we planning on taking this, all of these AI video technologies? Because in the end, we want to make a run it in the practice and see how it can apply to architectural design. So we have our own research lab now in STF. So we call it STF Labs. We have a mix of architects and also software engineers. We're now working on developing this technology towards utilization in real-time rendering so that you're able to actually manipulate geometries in real life, maybe do a sketch, and be able to get a feedback. And this is a good time to also announce that in about a week or so, we will be announcing our office's collaboration with NVIDIA, Autodesk, and Microsoft Azure. We've been collaborating on developing a prototype to give a real-time rendering using the best GPU graphics card in the world and the best cloud solutions in the world, and hopefully deliver this idea to fully fledged AI rendering model that is running. We're targeting 30 to 60 frames per second. It's quite expensive when it comes to the usage, but with that, we're hoping that it's able to deliver a really good output. And this is just a very early prototype of what we're currently doing. So hopefully that will be announced soon. And then, of course, with this technology, we want to take it to different types of devices. We want to be able to run it in real time when you're on the go. For example, if you're sketching something on an iPad, if you're going to a building, you're able to sketch over it and get an immediate sort of AI rendering of some of your interpretations as a sketch. And finally, we have what potentially might be the next generation of video rendering when it comes to utilizing parametric design in your process. We're experimenting heavily with parametric design research in our practice. And right now, the next goal is to develop the plugins to be able to simulate real-time urban environments while we are manipulating the data structures and the outputs. And so that concludes my segment of the showcase. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tim. That was extraordinary. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk more about Kling. Can I ask you one question first of all? What is the longest you can clip you get from Kling?
That's a good question. Our team has been working on it more than I have. I've kind of oversee the design of it, but I think it was about 15 seconds or so. We just cut it down because things tend to go haywire after like the first 5-6 seconds, as most AIs would. So it's similar to Runway when it comes to fidelity, although a lot more crispier. And also it doesn't have that fuzziness that Runway gets when you start to use camera movements, for example.
I noticed on your Runway clip of the piano scene, the head is being inverted. I don't know if you noticed this, but it's like there's some very strange.
We have a saying in our office, we call it the exorcism. Like every time the head turns 180, it's like, oh, another exorcism has happened.
And you sometimes get people who change gender in the middle of a video clip as well, which I should really have kept these things. I always delete them, but they're kind of intriguing. But anyway, Tim, that was fantastic. Jason, great to see you again. Having seen you in Manchester back in whenever it was, June or something. Would you like to share your screen?
Yep. Give me one moment. There we go. Hopefully that should be sharing.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah. So let me just move this out of the way. So I'll go straight ahead. So I'm Jason Taylor. I'm the head of architectural digital design at Manchester School of Architecture. And I just want to kind of talk a little bit about our journey through kind of exploring AI from kind of where we initiated from in terms of things like Midjourney back in mid-2022, all the way up to what we imagine kind of coming next. So firstly, a little bit about me. I've been a digital generalist for about 20 years now. I've been in teaching in academia since about 2012. My background isn't necessarily just in visualization and AI, but more in kind of building information modeling, working with data sets, a lot of machine learning, photogrammetry, 3D modeling, and of course, other forms of graphic design as well. I've always had a really big interest in the way that we can kind of obtain and generate data almost from nothing. And I think that's where I saw a lot of potential in terms of AI. So last year, with one of our labs, one of our courses, Architecture and Urbanism, we developed a prototype urbanism lab. And in here, we ran some really, really interesting kind of introductions to AI. And this was starting last September. So back when Midjourney was almost at its peak, because I would say Midjourney has peaked. But kind of before things like LookX or XKool, as it was known before, kind of really started to take hold. So the thing we found interesting with this is that we told the students it's a completely open brief. They can go ahead and use AI for this one module, and they can just make of it whatever they do. But the interesting thing with this is that the site we gave them almost had no data at all available for it. So we're saying as one of the requirements, you need to be able to develop and create new data that's true to the site. So what students would do is typically they would start with things like control nets in Stable Diffusion, looking at existing images, maps, and things like that, and try to start rationalizing sites and building 3D models, or, well, AI images that look like 3D models. But the other thing that we found as well is that students would then start creating these kind of almost Zaha-esque forms, because every student wants to be Zaha, apparently. But the thing that we found is that this was a big, big time saver for the students, because rather than spending all of their time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, 3D modeling something organic and complex, it allowed them to almost get this out of their system first, revisit the site and realize, actually, this isn't appropriate. So it was a really useful tool in terms of speed. What we also found as well is that students were not just using it for design communication, but also for things like narrative design. So explaining how users would use a site. And this is what really started to get us thinking, how else could we go about using these different forms of AI? And of course, up to this point, this is just image-based. I would say as soon as text to video and image to video started to appear, we got very, very excited, as I'm sure you can imagine. I myself was particularly blown away by the fidelity of scenes, particularly through camera movement. We did do some initial explorations, particularly in LookX, because that was the first one we had got to grips with last year. And then, of course, with the rise of things like Krea, particularly the experimental mode in Krea, where you can get these kind of morphing animations, it became very, very exciting for us. But I think straight away we started to find some kind of limitations. So I think the one here for me, this was an example using Luma. And the prompt was simply just a child walking along, trying to find his toys. And as you can see, he's kind of bopping along, but it doesn't quite understand the physics of how he wants to walk. Whereas if you compare that to something like Runway, you know, much more realistic human movement. But I thought, is it necessarily down to the AI engine itself that we're using, or is it more to do with the prompt engineering? Because as we all know with Midjourney and other AIs, the more proficient you become with prompt engineering, the more control you get. So we thought, how far can we push it? So rather than jumping straight into Sora or Runway, we started trying to push it with the lower engines. And we were able to start achieving things like this. So this is where it started to really get exciting for me, because we were really trying to replicate different forms of human movement in particular. And it started getting more and more realistic. And what we found is that if we had more human-like movement or something to follow, the environments around those objects would actually start becoming more tangible, as opposed to an empty scene. Now, whether that's just something that we figured out, I don't know, but it's really, really exciting for us to realize. And in fact, if I just show this one again, like if you see the edges of this, you know, all of these walls, they are quite high fidelity. They're not distorting at all. And this one, again, was just using Luma. And this was the early days of Luma. So again, super, super exciting. But I think, again, prompt engineering, particularly to describe camera control, is where this became key. The next one, obviously, I'm Manchester School of Architecture. So we decided to do a project exploring various geometric forms of a bee, because Manchester's kind of mascot, as it were, is the bee, the worker bee. And we wanted to start exploring things like text to 2D to video to 3D model. So that's where we really see this going as a tool from video to 3D. So for us, we started exploring various prompts. And what we started to realize is that although it does have issues with physics, it's really good at rationalizing environments and starting to create things like depth of field. And I think it's things like this where we can really start exploring ways to get this into 3D at a later date. Obviously, physics is still an issue with movement, particularly of non-humans, we found. And then finally, obviously, we studied kind of animals. We did study humans, but we did want to study non-human kind of movement as well, just to work out what the limitations were. And I found that for me, in particular with Runway, I had big trouble trying to create things like moving wheels, for instance, getting them to spin correctly on a car. And we had things like cars morphing front to back and things like that. So big breaks in geometry. But I would say the big thing with us is just trying to remove the uncanny valley effect. because again, the physics issues do need to be resolved to build effective environments. But things like following paths, tracking focus, these are things that, again, we started to be able to resolve through more complex prompt engineering. Moving on to Sora, I've decided to use a video that everyone would have seen by now, just to give an idea of what we could do with it. So as I said before, the goal has always been to create 3D models using AI. And I felt that the level of control from AI video could be suitable for things like photogrammetry, NeRFs, or Gaussian splatting, for those of you that are familiar with those. So I began with some example Sora footage of Santorini. And for a first attempt, I think it produced some pretty good results. For those of you that haven't seen the video before, here it is. And as we can see, it's a reasonably high fidelity video, but I'm sure you can predict already what the issues are going to be if you've done photogrammetry before. This was the point cloud that resulted from this, from the video. So it's reasonable for how far zoomed out that video was. It's not too bad. And I think I've seen other people trying to attempt photogrammetry from AI video on YouTube and various conferences. And most people seem to be writing this off at the moment. But I think the issue is more to do with resolution and proximity rather than the fact that it's AI generated. So some of the other explorations we started to do was trying to see how much we could almost dumb this down. So I've got an image there I generated here on the left using Krea. Big fan of Krea at the moment, particularly the real-time flux model that it has. I think it's extremely powerful. And then what we started to do with this, we ran this into Luma to make a 5-second video, which is this one here. And something that we found with this that's very interesting is that depending on the type of camera control that you create, it would actually start to distort the geometry of the scene. So in particular, we found there if where you were trying to zoom or pan, it would actually start warping and morphing. Whereas if you started trying to orbit, or if you started trying to kind of elevate above the model, like just simply moving rather than panning, that would actually keep the fidelity of the model itself. And the results were pretty fantastic of this. I mean, I'm exceptionally happy with this. From a 5-second video clip, it's been able to generate a pretty decent high fidelity 3D model. So again, we're really excited about this. And I think the good thing with tools such as Luma, it's very easy to get that camera control without distorting an environment. And the fact that you can extend videos as well. So you could have it kind of moving left to right, bottom to top, maybe orbiting around something while still keeping the geometry is extremely powerful. But I do feel as though software such as Sora, AI tools such as Sora, this is where it's really going to become important, because the fact that Sora has the capability to remember geometry out of frame, that is what's going to make this fantastic for 3D, I think. Obviously, I can't show you any of those just yet due to some of the NDAs and live projects we've got going on. They are sadly still going on. But I think the use of Sora in particular for environmental video, in and out of frame with some complex prompt engineering similar to using control nets, using that to generate 3D is just going to be the way forward. And I don't think it'll be photogrammetry. I think it'll be Gaussian splatting, just because of the way it processes and rationalizes those point clouds. And that's basically what we've been up to so far. So I think we're going to hand back to Neil now. I just want to thank everyone for their time.
Thanks. Yeah. Tantalizing. I wish we could see those Sora videos, of course, but
I did ask their permission and they said no. They said not yet, because it's a different branch of Sora at the moment that I'm not allowed to say too much about, similar to last time. I can touch on it. I'm allowed to touch on it, but I can't show stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I read somewhere they're working on sound, which would have made, I think, Tim's video of the piano intriguing. But I mean, just one general question. I mean, I don't know whether you're allowed to say this or whether you know about it, but why hasn't Sora been released? I mean, what happens with Midjourney is there are all these different versions, and they're happy to release one, then add another one. Do you think there's a risk that Sora is going to be missing out because these other platforms are hogging the limelight. I mean, the way that Midjourney basically, although DALL-E was there first, Midjourney has basically become the one of choice. Although that's for different reasons. But I mean, do you think it's risk that they're going missing out in the market?
100%, 110%. I think one of the big issues at the moment is that Runway Gen 3 in particular is now really starting to be able to rival Sora in terms of the way it can rationalize movement. And I think that's going to be the key thing there. And I do kind of have a feeling that this is why maybe Sora might be slightly delayed, because although it is still ahead, it needs to be the big competitor for when they start charging for it realistically. And I think at the moment, I don't want to say it doesn't offer much more than what else is currently on the market, but I think it needs to offer more than it does now. And I think the key issues are more to do with how it handles physics, if I'm honest. And I think once those issues are resolved, and I feel as though they're getting closer with it, there's various things that they're doing behind the scenes. I don't know if Tim's able to talk more about it, particularly with the VR side of things and rationalizing in real time. I think once that's resolved, that's as soon as it's going to come out, basically. It's just not quite there. But I agree, they run the risk of falling behind, same as Midjourney, same as DALL-E. You know, they're dinosaurs now in comparison, sadly.
Yeah. Tim, do you want to comment on that?
I think most likely we've signed the exact same NDA with OpenAI.
I think so.
But it's definitely developing. I mean, when I was in the middle of that process, they've already implemented image to video. And starting that process, there weren't even that. So it was interesting to see the development ongoing as I was still accessing it. I have access to it now indefinitely, but I haven't checked because honestly, after seeing it flatline for quite a while, as you guys have seen, as other tools have come up, I did realize that, the increasing competition allows the other tools to really do more. And it's just more applicable for us because we're designing projects using models, renderings, and 3Ds. And just using pure text to generate things doesn't really offer so much to the application of architecture. So our projects, we run the renders into this video rendering softwares such as Runway and now Kling, and we're able to get the precise results that we're looking for. And as you say, it's the future. Image to video is the version that I think should be developed forward. Hopefully, Sora is on that.
Maybe a question. I don't want you to contravene your non-disclosure agreement, but I mean, as I was testing out Runway, I was wondering whether some of the issues I was finding would be also there with Sora. I mean, in particular, I mentioned before that the instruction to finish off the video turning to the left, and it would be right or left, or you could never control that. Take your sunglasses off, it could be putting the sunglasses on. It's that kind of thing. And I was speculating that they had basically cherry picked the very best videos, and we only got one 60-second one, which but that was remarkable. That was absolutely remarkable. But it strikes me that maybe that there are, you could cherry pick anything and get something to look good. But yes, did you find that? Well, I don't want you to put you on the spot, but did you find that there were similar things that Sora hadn't cracked everything, basically? Yeah.
Who'll go first?
Either
you can go first if you like.
Yeah, it's funny. I have so in Sora you could save different folders, right? I have a specific folder called like oddities, and it's really fun to watch. I'm sure Jason, you have the exact same experience. Anything from heads turning upside down, what's called exorcisms. The head somehow always, and the head and the body always rotate in the wrong directions. You get 3 hands, 4 hands. There are some very horrific results that resulted to a point where I think a horror director better jump on this because that is really good stuff for horror material. But I think comparatively speaking, it's actually just percentage-wise harder to get something resolved with Sora. At least when I had my run at it, it was cherry-picked, obviously. They hired me as a collaborating artist so that we try to give it in the best light. And obviously that's something we can say because we are all hired to sort of improve and find the best results. And 100 trials later, hundreds of images, I would pick out 10, or hundreds of videos, I pick out 10, and then string it together to a video. And that's what we see, what I showcased. Now with Runway, maybe every 10 videos, I'll get 3 good ones. And right now, I think with Kling, it's similar to Runway in terms of percentage of viable results. So we found it to be cost effective, although we have Sora without cost, but in terms of time wise, it's cost effective to be using, for me, Kling at least.
That's fantastic. I gotta say, I'm exactly the same. I have and what did I call it? Accidental explorations folder, which I really like. But I think some of the things for me, it's when I was trying to do the Android ones in particular, I was trying to get androids playing with kids, throwing balls, reading books, things like that. And it kept on showing me androids trying to strangle children, which was quite a concern. I don't know why it kept doing that. And it kind of scared me a bit, if I'm honest, thinking, you know, how little control I actually have over this. I'm like, why is it actually trying to do this? But I think one of the things I found with Sora, particularly when you start working more on the back end of it, is that in terms of camera control, you can really start entering in more complex prompts than what you can do with Runway. So with Runway, you can obviously choose, you know, various fields of view. You can tell it to go over the shoulder. You can do FPV shots. You can do all sorts of things. But I think with Sora, what I found is that just by kind of tweaking it, you can really start to modify things like rule of thirds, kind of grid lines, and say focus on this. Start modifying like particular types of perspective. You can even start actually kind of almost engineering exactly how to control various pixels, which I find really interesting. So I think it's one of those things. Once you kind of get that nailed, you could say, okay, specifically set the focal point of the camera to this frame or this pixel. What was it? Camera should be X amount distance away. It should have this particular type of motion, as opposed to something in Runway where you're just saying follow the person using an FPV or something. So I think that's where the control comes from. But again, for me, it's just the physics issues that are there.
Jason, there was one thing that really kind of echoed with what my experience is, and that was the when you started putting people into the scene, it kind of rationalized the scene and kind of made it, I don't know, people friendly. It was almost like it took the proportions of a human being. And it kind of strangely reminded me of some of those Renaissance things, right? Where you'd kind of get this plan of a building and you put the figure on an overlay and it would adopt that. It was extraordinary. And that I find tantalizing. And I don't quite understand why or how it's doing that. I mean, there are many things that are happening in terms of prompts that are kind of total alchemy anyway, but why it's taking the human scale and using it in that way. But I think that is something that unexpected, and I don't know whether you could call it an emergent capability, but it's something extraordinary.
I think for me, it's one of those things. It all comes back down to the data sets that it's trained on. I mean, when you think of the amount of data pumped in, the majority of images and video out there are of a camera focusing on a human, and the environment becomes secondary context. I think for me, that's where I started getting excited doing the motion explorations, particularly of people, and then onto vehicles outside as well. That's when I was able to generate some of my best environments. And those were purely text to video. That wasn't text to image, then image to video, purely straight text to video. Whereas if I tried doing the same thing without something else to focus on, it just didn't like it. It's absolutely fascinating.
Well, one of the interesting questions that came up was I was trying out Runway using some of the prompts that Sora had provided, and which was useful. It was very generous to provide the prompts. I don't think Runway provide prompts. But what I found interesting, there was one particular bird that I showed with this beautiful crest who turns its head, and it has a particular name. I think it's some kind of moorhen from Papua New Guinea. Forget exactly, but I did take the prompt and I ran it through Runway, and I got nothing like that. Nothing. It was just a kind of generic bird turning its head. And I'm wondering whether the background, should we call it labeling, that was done through DALL-E has helped Sora in that respect in terms of recognizing images. Do you think that would be the case?
I don't know if Tim wants to take that one.
I didn't quite understand your second half.
Oh, okay. No, so it was just simply the fact that Sora can deal with a more sophisticated language in terms you can describe a precise bird and it will bring that bird. It will give you that bird. That doesn't happen in Runway. It's pretty crude.
I think it's more database oriented. From my experience, for example, in Sora, I've tried prompting certain architectural typologies and it just doesn't come up. And if you prompt like futuristic things, usually gives you things that like, 80s like stock footage videos of futuristic things. And I'm sure Jason definitely stumbled upon the
Blade
same.
Runner.
Yeah, but like
Yeah.
and shot with a camcorder or something. So we just know automatically that it has to do with the database that is trained on. At this point, is certain amount of stock footage. And if you look on the news, for example, Runway has announced their collaboration with Lionsgate, a Canadian film company, to be able to train off of their cinematic database, which is a huge step in the AI and film industry. And I think that's how we take the step towards the type of results we're looking for. I mean, everything boils down to database. Back in the days when I was teaching Midjourney class, how to use Midjourney, one of the elements was showcasing the actual database that the Midjourney is used to train on, and use the um, search engine so the students can actually go to the original database search engine and actually type out the prompt to test out what actual images are used to prompt the image once you type it in. So then you're able to understand the database that actually becomes images, which are actually the product that trains the machine. So I think that is the same thing with videos. It all boils down to whatever database it has and what text is linked to what database. For example, right now you can't prompt famous architects or people, namely in Sora, but you can also get around by describing the specific building's name, which I've done in the past, to be able to prompt things that are quote unquote copyrighted. And it's just all like a game of, how to achieve the results based on what database it has.
Jason?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the things for me, particularly because we've been trying to address digital poverty with students, because the early days we were using things like Stable Diffusion, which is obviously very hard to install for some students. So we adopted LookX quite early on. I think the way that LookX has evolved in particular, the way it's got its own architectural specific library, it has prompt engineering assistance now. It can start to do some image to video and text to video based stuff. And I could imagine that if they do continue to evolve that and keep pumping in more references, more data sets, I could actually see that becoming a very powerful tool. And I do agree. I think this is where Sora currently is falling a little bit flat. I believe it is more to kind of protect designers. They're trying to almost take an ethical approach to it, which I can respect. But at the same time, design is inspired by design. It's no different than if I go out and start sketching a building. I'm still inspired by it. I can reference forms as long as I'm generating something new. And I think that's the approach everyone needs to be adopting with it. So I think, restricting specific terms or stripping out people's names so they can't be copied, I just don't see that being the way forward. It's just not going to help anyone. We just end up with this generic blob of stuff.
No, it is a bit strange when everything's out there, in the commons, as it were. You can take a photograph of Buckingham Palace or whatever. You're not infringing copyright. Why they need to employ that? Then it is stifling a certain form of creativity. I did try Elvis once. I thought it was dead people you could do, but you can't even do Elvis, and you get some very strange looking Elvises appearing if you try and do that.
Have you tried Mickey Mouse? I wonder, since it's in the public domain.
Mickey Mouse?
Yeah.
I haven't. No, I haven't. Maybe I
I
could.
haven't tried that.
Maybe Tim, I could ask you about LookX, because you were using LookX early on, with your crumpled paper Gary-esque kind of commentary, which I was very intrigued by. But now you're teaming up with Autodesk. Why is that?
They're different beasts for different usage. With LookX, it was, as Jason mentioned, an architecturally oriented database that is legitimately useful for implementing architectural results using stable, well, control net-based outputs. So you have specific controlled inputs of images and massing, and you get outputs. And that was really helpful. But there are other tools as well that offer similar abilities in current stage, and everyone's still competing. And with regards to Autodesk, it's they actually also have a team working on AI now as well. And after our current collaboration, we've been discussing to continue on how to bring that forward as a collaboration. But the idea is right now, our close association is with NVIDIA, who's approached us to actually work on this tool using their graphics card and Microsoft Azure server in order to create our own version of this real-time rendering machine in order to get something at least 30 to 60 frames per second and temporal consistency as an output. So we could imagine, what we did with the Gary folding paper type of exercise. Imagine it in real time. Imagine you're in VR, you're talking to your students or the client. You just start to just shift and morph the real life objects, and you can see cars and people circulating around while you're able to manipulate that. I think that's where the future lies. Showcasing its fully fledged results while you're still playing around, not even in the machine, but with your hands. I think the most tactile, the most realistic control that you can get out of this is the most rewarding.
I got to say, that sounds absolutely fantastic. I would love to try that at some point. I could totally imagine this, putting on a VR headset, you don't see the paper you're crumpling. All you see is this building you're forming and stretching and pushing and pulling. And I would absolutely love to try that. I'm going to give you a call.
Yeah, stay tuned. I think we're first going to make announcements next week, and we're going to go to the Autodesk University to do the first demo of our prototype, which is in like 15th of October, I believe. And then after that, we will continue to develop this tool for the industry. Hopefully, all architectural industry can find this useful.
Brilliant.
Let me just quickly say to our audience, if anyone's got any questions on YouTube, please send it on YouTube. Perhaps I could just pick up on something, Jason, you were talking about. I mean, the shift towards 3D, and there was something looking remarkably convincing that you were showing us. And but I just wanted you to kind of like to comment on how easily accessible is it to operate in that way? Is this just kind of prototype research-based experimentation, or is this a kind of technique that everyone can or should soon be able to use?
Anyone can do that entire process completely for free today. Essentially, the workflow for that was to generate an image using Creo. So just a standard image. And then I thought, because we used it for the promo, I'll use that as an example for today. All I did from there, took that into, I think it was Luma, the first one I did, just because I've really worked out how to get that kind of non-decimating control of cameras. Doesn't destroy the integrity of the geometry. And then from there, just a series of 5-second video generations. Take those, extract the frames. There are various frame extracting websites out there you can upload a 5-second clip to, and it will give you a nice folder with everything isolated. And then that gives you everything you need for photogrammetry. For those people out there that use Unreal Engine, Twinmotion, obviously you now get free access to reality capture, which is fantastic for 3D model building. So being able to pump in a series of images, just a whole folder of still frames, or even ripping it straight from a video, which does also work. You can then really start to look through each frame, remove anything that's blurry, anything that's causing any problems. And you can really start to rationalize the geometry, same way you would with maybe drone footage or anything like that. The way it generates the point clouds, I think, is very convincing. Once you start generating meshes, you can start having issues. But again, that's the same as photogrammetry issues you get from anything. But I think for me, starting to play with things like nerves and Gaussian splatting in particular, which is an interesting one. That is what really got interesting for me, because it's not bound by the same limitations of depth as photogrammetry, but it can still rationalize environments as a 3D object and generate point clouds and meshes and texture-based stuff. So yeah, completely for free. And then obviously from there, you can chuck that into, something like Twinmotion or Unreal for visualization. You could chuck it into Rhino and keep working on it. I've actually been working on a process for getting it into ZBrush for doing retopologization. So retopologize and decimate everything down, and then bring that into something like Revit, or maybe even into Rhino first. I've worked on some Grasshopper scripts to then start rebuilding these geometries based on surface normals. Then using Rhino inside Revit, I've been able to start generating Revit models where I could start ripping construction details. And this all came from a text prompt. So I can really see this is where it's starting to go. And I think AI as a co-pilot is going to be a thing. And I think the video aspect we're seeing now is just one kind of stepping stone for rationalizing the 3D elements of environments. But yeah, it's fantastic to see. I'm super excited.
No, can I just maybe pick up on that? I mean, talking about going into Revit, I mean, I can understand you could get a fairly convincing 3D model of the thing itself. But it's breaking it down into the components, of the architectural components of which could be created would be the crucial step. Is that what you're referring to?
Essentially, yeah. So I think it's one of those things where you're almost working to different levels of detail, I would say. So going from almost like a macro kind of scale from the exterior of the building to rationalize the geometry and the form. And then once you have that, then you can start moving into the next level, start working out interior strategies. And then it comes down to basically just some clever Grasshopper. Because the way I'm using it at the moment is just the Rhino Inside plugin. So I can start decimating things down into just core pieces of geometry, and then just start tagging and saying, okay, this is a floor, this is a ceiling, and it might tweak it, it might adapt it. But that process can then feed back in to the beginning of all of this and start generating more images, and it can just become an iterative cycle. So it's quite convoluted at the moment, but once it gets refined and sped up, the AI will inform the design and rationalization of the space, which then creates more images, which then reinforms. And you just end up with these prompts where you'll end up with this almost one size fits all kind of approach to designing it. I almost don't want it to go that way, if I'm honest, because I feel as though we need specialists in core areas, but who knows? I'm almost able to achieve this now, and this is very early on. And what's it going to be in 2 or 3 years' time? It's crazy.
I can imagine it could be automated, more automated. Yeah, that would really change things. Tim, what do you think?
It's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's inevitable and we are preparing for it, to be honest. One of the core values of what we believe in is AI's ability to take over aspects that are generalist tasks, we believe. For example, we currently our, architectural industry is partitioned by specializations, and that's just because of us as humans have a limitation on our understanding and expertise. Therefore, we partition not just, this workflow, but our society, everything into this sort of frame by frame, step by step expertise. And there is inherent inefficiencies that comes with this partitioning. And I think AI is here to solve that. Like we have slow turnaround when we design something, we give it to the rendering company, then they take 2 weeks, they come back, and then we give this to the client, they come back, they get their structure team to analyze for another week, and then it comes back. And so that back and forth is both costly in terms of budget and time, and it's inefficient. And if AI is here to be able to be the generalist that can specialize in all of these things and be able to synthesize it into a continuous process, that's ultimately the philosophy of what we want to achieve, is to be able to be the designer, the architect at the beginning, be able to crumble the piece of paper that we discussed, but automatically get an output, be able to maybe Gaussian splat it or use cloud point system to understand your geometry, rationalizing using some sort of general intelligent AI that can just, retrofit bin modeling process on top and then give you calculations of both its efficiencies and its budget and its material use and then sustainable factors. All of which, if we can analyze right from the start, that will save us a lot on cost. And then just to echo Jason's point, I think the specialists will be extra important when it comes to, this AI process because Now the AI is a generalist, be able to produce the whole process for us like a pipeline. And I see the specialists, the humans, as the pipeline maintenance workers. Like the structural expert engineer will always be there to analyze the structural aspect of the AI to and vet it to see if it's working effectively. And then us architects and designers, we're at the beginning stage, we'll be able to continue to, inherit our human values onto the design process and the architectural values and philosophies. And then you have the masonry workers or the concrete analyzers to all the way at the end of the process analyze and make sure the machine is behaving correctly. Either the autonomous robots are building things correctly or the analysis tools are correct. So the human specialists, I believe, are now the vetters, if you will, the curators of the process as well as vetting if every segment is working effectively. But ultimately, the AI is able to assimilate this into singular process that enables us to think about all the factors at the same time, therefore giving you the ultimate best outcome.
Yeah, like maybe I could just raise something that was brought up by Charles Liu last week in the XKool LookX session. It's in a sense the one comment that the Suskins make about this. This is what they wrote 2016, years and years ago, as it were now, saying that the main driver of change is going to be economics. But actually, when you think about it, of course, economics is connected to time. Time is money kind of thing. And when you get in the situation because Charles was presenting this, what had been a kind of COVID hotel, but became a 4-star hotel soon afterwards, that went from design to design to construction in 4.5 months. I mean, that is astonishing. And if you just think about a hotel, I don't know how long a typical hotel would take to build these days, or in the traditional way, but probably closer to 4.5 years and 4.5 months. And if that were the case, then you're basically getting 4 years of renting out rooms in that hotel, which is crucial. It's a crucial driver of change. And I absolutely think that's going to be the crucial issue. Of course, I find the question of time the biggest challenge right now as someone who's writing about these things. In the sense, it's taking almost 12 months to get a book out from when you deliver the manuscript. And you can kind of tweak it along the way. I'm in the situation now proofreading a second edition of my first book on AI, and I'm trying to tweak it and keep it up to date. But these things are changing so rapidly. Any book, by definition, is going to be out of date. So you've got to kind of somehow predict something. I mean, I think one thing I did predict was that it was going to be all about text to video now, in which case the images have somehow taken a back seat for the moment. So we have to introduce some sort of QR code so that people can actually can access an up-to-date information. But it's a challenge. Jason, what do you think?
Oh, I completely agree. The pace at which it's moving is insane. I mean, from an educational perspective, we've obviously had to try and police this in academia, because the whole point of academia is to evidence that you've learned something effectively. So for us, obviously, within project briefs, we have things like learning outcomes that students need to meet. But if they're using AI, is it the AI that produced the work, or is it the student? And at what level do you prohibit the student from using AI if it's expected to be used in practice? Because the whole point of us teaching the students is to prepare them for the future workplace. So it's become something that we really need to try and focus on. And then there's obviously the ethical side of things. What data sets are people using? Are you infringing on people's copyright? So for us, it's been a minefield how much everything's evolved over the past year. But I feel as though we've got quite a robust strategy ourselves for it now, which I'm really happy about. It's taken us a while to work it out. But in terms of where it's moving forward, text to video, I think, is going to be a bigger leap than text to image, if I'm honest. I think that on its own was groundbreaking, but I think the applications now for text to video and image to video, absolutely insane. I mean, we've just been playing around again with the point cloud stuff we ripped today, and we were turning these into 3D printed components. Just they're non-architectural, but just to see what we can generate with images, generate point clouds, and then seeing how we could, trying to rationalize those into 3D printable, solid, watertight objects. And it's crazy. How long is it before that you skip that process altogether? You don't even see the video elements. You just type in a prompt and it sends it to the printer. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought of that comment before that you'd made, that basically it's happening in practice, therefore it should be happening in education. I completely believe that. I mean, we've seen in education a history of resistance to these technologies. I mean, I was trained at Cambridge where we were banned from using computers in the studio, which was just totally ridiculous because it basically generated graduating students who are unemployable, and we have to deal with these things. And it's kind of similar to what we did with calculators. There's no point banning calculators. Once you've got them, you've got to use them. So my position, I teach a big theory class at Florida International University, and in the past they would write essays, but I'm saying, well, you could do an essay on ChatGPT. That's not going to really challenge you. So I'm saying use as much AI as possible, and see what you can achieve, and that way you actually can see some kind of creativity because you're using all the tools, and they have great fun. I asked them to do a Black Mirror episode together.
Oh, fantastic.
They have great fun doing that. But no, it's an important thing to take on board. And what does disturb me, I mean, is that practice is forced to keep up with these things because you're keeping up with your competitors. You've got no choice. But education, there are so many instances. I mean, I've been in places where they'd never heard of AI before, really. I mean, it's astonishing. And when there's a resistance to it. And that's kind of almost criminal when we're dealing with the kids who are going to be going out there into a world where AI is absolutely dominating everything. But here's a question for you. Now, if we spoke typically about time, if AI is doing everything for us or much more for us than it used to, do we need 5 years of architectural education?
That's a question.
Yeah.
If I say no, then I won't have a job to go to tomorrow. So I'm going to say yes. We still need this. I think again, currently the tools are driven by the designers. I think whether it's in terms of development or using them. So I think at the moment, yeah, of course, we're still needed. I would love to think that we're never going to be outpaced by machines, but I think it's probably not realistic to say that machines won't be able to do it better than we can in the future. Machines can design to an extent at the moment, and I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of, and it's going to be an exponential growth. I think it might plateau at some point, but I could definitely see it outpacing us at some point. But who's to say that our own lived experiences aren't still important? We still need to be informing the design process ourselves. So I could almost see it changing. It's the same as you mentioned a minute ago, like with the rise of the calculator or the introduction of the computer in the workplace. You used to have architectural art workers, illustrators, model makers, whereas now we expect the students to all be generalists. Does that mean that those roles don't exist in practice anymore? Of course not. There are still smaller practices that don't use computers at all. There are some that are very heavily digital. It depends on the approach of the practice. And I think in the future, it will just be one more type of practice that gets added.
You made a comment, Jason. I think it was you rather than Tim, but saying that we're kind of becoming curators increasingly. And I think that there is one particular skill that we still have and will be increasingly important. We saw this actually with Midjourney, these text to image ones, and that is to say, you've got to have a good eye. You've got to know what you're looking for to produce. To breed the right outcome, as it were, and take it further. And that's something that we're actually very strong at. I mean, I've always taken this sort of view that we're actually we're quite weak at the imagination thing on the whole, but we're very good at discerning what is good. We can do it instantaneously. And I think that's going to be increasingly the issue. We need to have that. I mean, I can take a Midjourney prompt and I can change building and put it into fashion or something, and I'll get an amazing fashion item. I don't know if it's good enough or not. I have to ask my friends who actually were fashion designers to tell me, is this okay? So, I mean, that's still an area I think that we will still have a certain strength, a kind of critical eye, this kind of discriminator sort of outlook on life. That's certainly my view. And I think the shift will be increasing towards that. We'll less the kind of genius designer of the past who would just produce these incredible things, because somebody just using Midjourney can produce incredible things. It's really a question of how do you judge it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the fact that you've used fashion as an example in particular, because something that we've been exploring again, also with the use of AI, is generating tensile structures. So for us, originally we would do various forms of simulation in terms of grasshopper, using some kangaroo or something. But I think the use of AI is now really interesting because you can use AI to generate images for print, like things like dye sublimation processes and embroidery, devore, etc. But I think the thing that is interesting for us is the use of robotics within fashion as well, and the way AI can potentially get involved in that. We've done some quite interesting stuff, or even just the use of being able to generate vector-based things. So, for instance, pattern cutting using Lectra and Gerber, being able to simulate cloth in Marvelous Designer. All of these things are fascinating that architects should be jumping on. And if you add AI into the mix, you get some really interesting transdisciplinary stuff appearing. And I can almost see almost like new disciplines emerging from this. Or maybe it's more that they all collapse down into one discipline and it just becomes design as opposed to architectural design and such. It's fascinating. I can't wait to see where it goes.
I want to bring Tim in a second, but let's just pick you up on the fashion thing because I've got one of my doctoral candidates, Alberto, is a fashion designer, and he's interested in kind of laying out the patterns, as it were, and how do you but you can unfold that already in Rhino and those kind of things. I was thinking, well, maybe the real challenge is to avoid that stage. In other words, can you not go? You could scan the body, and then you could effectively use some kind of robotic printer or knitting machine even to create a kind of all-in-one outfit where you don't have to actually unfold it all into patterns in the traditional way.
Oh, totally. I mean, the one for me is wearables. For anyone who doesn't know, outside of academia, also design their prosthetic limbs for amputees, which is fantastic stuff, weird and wonderful ones like tentacles and things. But the one that we've been working on at the moment is basically a simplified process, again, utilizing some AI to assist in the design process. But these are fully electronic devices where we can 3D scan a residual limb, 3D scan an opposing one or reference one from a library, or use AI to generate an AI designed arm. And we can bring these things into Grasshopper and say, okay, connect this in, generate the rest of the process. We've got everything automatically built. And it means that within a day, you can fabricate an entire arm that matches an existing arm on the opposing side. Absolutely insane. And that's not something that you could get from mass production. It's something that has to be unique and bespoke. And I think the use of things like machine learning and AI is only going to help bring these things to people. So again, I just find it absolutely incredible where it's going and the pace at which it's developing. Scary, but exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Tim, can I just bring you in here to maybe ask you a slightly different question? I mean, you've kind of carved a niche for yourself, it seems, and almost defined a new kind of architect, that is heavily AI reliant and maybe not quite the traditional architect in the traditional sense, not like what maybe you're doing at Zaha Hadid Architects, which is basically detailing the building. Do you see that new kind of architect emerging? And secondly, what feedback are you getting from clients about the use of AI?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that question is very good and very central to the why we ran the practice. When I was Zaha Hadid Architects, I was in the computational research department, and researching new technologies and figuring out how to implement them is the crux of the office's efforts. And when we found AI, we're still in the traditional framework of a practice that's been existing for a couple of decades. And I had a thought, just how, if AI is to be fully fledged, be able to do a lot of the things we don't typically allow AI to do in the practice, how well the practice look like? And so with that mindset, I eventually decided to run this experiment, just leave Zaha Hadid and then start my own practice from the grounds up and think about anything and everything that could be dictated or helped out alongside with AI. And that goes from anything from administrative tasks, which I have trained GPTs that helps me with, to certain ways of answering emails, to answering certain technical questions and legal terms, sorting that with a certain type of GPT, and then all the way to organizing the office structure in a way that is different from anyone else's. Because right now, tech is a big part of our office, and we have, programmers, engineers, ML engineer, and full stack engineer. that you don't typically expect to take up like 20-30% of an office, right? At least in architectural practice. But now we realize that's actually more central than ever. And we're developing tools day by day in order to allow for AI's process to be more implemented towards the architectural decisions that we do day by day. And when it comes to clients, it's an absolutely interesting reaction from them as well, because we have certain clients that approach us because we do AI and they're curious to see how we can do a project based on it. So we have, fully commissioned projects where we're going to be delivering later this year and finally be announced to the world, hopefully sooner than later. I've been just riddled with NDAs with everything we've been doing this year, and I can't wait to show that to the world. But other than that, you can see some of the clients uh, invited us to competitions with other competitors, other architectural firms. And in the concept delivery stage, we're able to produce a lot more results, a lot more quicker. We don't need to care about the turnaround of a traditional rendering company. And while we're communicating interims with the client, they're able to look at a full spectrum of results and give us, from the gradient where they want to go. For example, if you do like a high-rise tower project, you have, 30 by 50 frame or 30 by 50 uh, matrix of results, huge amounts. And then you just go from the most classical, the most archetypal structures all the way to the more ambitious and more hallucinant, as we call it, type of results. And then the client's able to just point their finger and say, I'm generally comfortable about this level of ambition and this level of creativity. Not too much, not too little. And then from there, you're able to then go into that area and start to look at more results and develop more results based on that. So the communication with clients has become drastically improved and fluent. We're able to really get a lot of detailed feedback from clients. If they see the window detail of this option looks good, the door detail of this option looks good, and then you automatically have a very refined understanding of what the client wants. So that in itself is very powerful. And that allows us to compete right next to the other big boys of architecture and be able to win some competitions. And we're quite happy about that. So hopefully we'll get to announce those as well. But anything from urbanism projects to landscape to architecture, urban complexes, and also interior, we touch on. And as Jason said, it's, AI allows us to touch more interdisciplinary fields. We've been approached by jewelry company and also fashion as well, although we have limited capacity in approaching those fields. And also even musician who's just curious about what we do. We've been in contact with certain content creation and big companies who are interested in you working with us. Just yesterday, I got a message from Adobe as well that want to work on another development for their AI model. So that's going to come out literally next week as well. So it's really interesting to be practicing architecture, but also being directly involved with Meta, OpenAI, NVIDIA, Adobe, and all the big boys in the AI field, which really puts us in a very unique position. And we feel very grateful. Our entire team, full of, AI specialists and architects and engineers, we're trying to create this new ecosystem. And let's see how it develops because it's like a 2-year long experiment so far. And let's see where it goes.
Well, maybe I could just pick up on what are you seeing a new kind of client emerging? Or I mean, because I guess I can imagine certainly with these tech companies, you're going to get them pretty open-minded in some senses. But just to say that one of the things I was talking to Guven Chosel, who's he teaches at UCLA, very heavily AI-based practice, very small practice, and he was almost winning all these competitions. But what he found was holding him back is these big practices have got a kind of they've got a mechanism for kind of schmoozing with the client, whatever that might be, playing golf with them or something, something they didn't have that, meant that despite the fact that maybe he was coming up with better designs, there were other things that were kicking in that were preventing him from winning or his team from winning these projects. And I guess there's always going to be this kind of resistance within the mainstream. But are we seeing some really enlightened clients pushing and changing the nature of architectural commissions because they're totally sold on AI. They could see it as the future and they want people to be experimenting like you guys are?
Yeah, I think that also has to do with the way our society is now ever more so digitized in a way where a lot of our works gets proliferated digitally through various social media platforms. So, like you says, it does feel like the client is not like different client or anything. It's just they now have access to this new data sets, new information. So they gave people like us a chance, you know. We're juniors, we don't have, 10, 20 years of prolific projects in the background, but we're able to showcase what we do, our design ethos, through the process that we use with AI and through the platforms on social media. And so these clients somehow emerge from that aspect and be able to communicate with us and say, we actually like your designs, even though you haven't seen us build anything specifically, we want you to give it a go. And once you go, project after project, you win, you become close to certain clients, and then you become the go-to for quite a few projects. So I think it's definitely something to jump on at the beginning. It's difficult, but the fact that AI as a technology and social media as a platform, all these things really combine together to give us a junior practice an opportunity to compete at the world stage. I think that says speaks quite volume.
But maybe just sorry, this is fascinating. Because my apologies. Well, no, I'm not apologizing because I think it's really important. But you're not a traditional practice, as I understand it, in terms of kind of delivering all the details and so on. Do you see yourself as a kind of a collaborate, the kind of new forms of collaboration where coming in, where you're the kind of front end kind of Imagineers or something that are putting out the concepts, and then some other firm is going to be picking up and realizing the
Hmm.
detailing of the
Yeah,
project.
yeah, absolutely. And actually, we're not new in doing this type of methods. I picked this up from multiple offices I worked at in the past, all of which are international, which means we do projects in either it could be China, it could be Middle East. In Zaha Hadid, I worked, 3 years on just this huge master plan in China, working with the local engineers and the government on site. And we learned how to become the sort of instigator of ideas and the concept, the designer, the developer. And then we work with local architects and structural engineers to realize, rationalize it, and deliver it to construction. So I was very familiar with this as a methodology. So when I started my practice, I was like, okay, it's the same thing, We are a London-based office. We take care of the overall master planning, visioning, concept visioning of the entire project. And then we worked with local practice as well as the local government agencies to deliver the project. So the project in Europe, we have local architect that we're working with in order to develop projects. Projects in Middle East, we have the government developers as well as local engineers. And finally, you have like landscape consultants, uh, rendering people. We phase them out kind of like halfway through the process already. So we're just working directly with the clients and the people that are contracting and developing the projects. So it's an existing way.
Look, just one more question. How does that work with the fee scale? I mean, it's nothing like the RIBA standard fee scale thing, right? You're operating in a very different domain. I mean, Zaha, I imagine Zaha works outside that in the first place, but there's a
Yeah, I think Zaha is like that now more than ever. Every project that we developed at that time, when I was working there at least, every project is then finally touched on by local practices, structural consultants, engineers, and then the client side, there's quite a few more consultants. Um, I actually myself haven't worked in a single practice that goes from beginning to end just by ourselves. It's become, I think once you reach this type of practice that works on an international front, it always becomes a consortium of sorts because everybody specializes in one thing, right? If you are working either at, it could be KPF, SOM, IDIS, or any other companies like that, they also, if they work on these local projects, often or than not will be working on their themselves concepts and then the local architects and consultants working on the implementation.
Jason, we should try and wrap this up. There's been a fascinating discussion. I just want to maybe get you
Yeah.
to comment on that from a kind of educational perspective. I imagine that
Yeah.
not so long ago, you had been doing the BIM, and now there's something completely different happening now. That's
this is the crazy thing, and I think for us, we have to like develop a digital strategy for our students to make sure everyone is learning the essential skills desired in the workplace. Can people technically draw? Can people 3D model, whether it's NURBS or BIM? What are they visualizing? How are they doing design communication? I think for me, the thing I find interesting is the people that are using AI tools at the moment already understand a lot of architectural terminology. So what I want to see over time is the effects on things like design ideation and design cognition in particular. Because for me, it's all about those little mistakes. I think back to when I was a student doing my BA, back when I had to visualize using 3ds Max in V-Ray. This was like 15, 16 years ago. And having to understand how ray tracing worked and how light is bouncing and all of these things. Most students don't need to know any of this stuff today. So there's all these little gaps in knowledge that are slowly being phased out because they're already rationalized in newer packaged tools. And I think, do students even need to understand things like camera composition now? Do they need to understand materiality as much? So I think that's my concern. Where do those gaps in knowledge start disappearing? And how do we even combat that? Do we need to combat that? And that's the thing I find interesting, especially in those relationships with clients, because the client stays relatively the same. You're showing them more tangible things at a faster pace that are believable, and that might be a good thing. But the designer behind it, do they understand what they've designed? Is it rational? Is it buildable? Is it structural? And I think there's going to be a big gap in knowledge of the future student. And I think, again, I could almost see that transfer into the workplace. So it could be that we kind of peak in terms of AI with the people's current knowledge, but it might even then start to dip or plateau. And then we need new roles to help rationalize things and re-explain. I can't predict where it's going to go, but I'm absolutely fascinated by it.
I think we all are. I think we all are. Let's then just wrap this up. I think this has been an absolutely brainstorming, whatever the word is, a session in which we move from talking about text to video to actually a whole new theater of operations, both in practice and in academia. I think that what we're dealing with now is not just the technology. We're dealing with the change in practice that has been brought about by these new technologies, by these new ways of thinking. I mean, I can't help but think that also the text to video itself starts conditioning the way in which we imagine spaces as being choreographed compared to the kind of static ways of the past. And I'm quite convinced that that is a way forward. I'm sort of thinking back of Bernard Schumi actually designed our building at Florida International University, and he was always working on cinematic techniques in terms of design, vectors of movement and so on, in order to understand a building. And I think this is going to come back and actually open up a fascinating new way in which we conceptualize the spaces that we're designing. It's going to be a radically different sort of way of operating that could be extraordinary, opening up a new sort of way of thinking. And I do think that kind of like, in a way, it's a kind of crisis, but a very positive crisis, a bit like the Renaissance. As you just understand perspective, you see the world very, very differently. But the key thing is that everybody's got to be kept up to speed in all this. And the real challenge is that I can bring in guys like yourself, cherry pick the best in the world, but not every school of architecture or every practice has got the people like you working there. How do you, and that's where Digital Futures comes in. We try to use this platform and share these ideas with as many people as possible. Let me just finally say with one thing I meant to say to the students is that I don't know what Sora is going to cost. I know that Runway, if you want to use Runway, you've kind of got to use the main package where you're using it the whole time, because it's almost impossible to do very much on these small tokens. It won't work. But you can get a 20% discount, educational discount, if you're a student or a professor, and that makes a huge difference. Let's see what Runway brings to us. But in the meantime, I can see that there are plenty of other platforms that are rivaling this. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a very complex field in the future. And thank you both for your insights in showing us your experiences and putting them out there, because I've certainly learned a lot today, and I've been using these tools. Goodness knows what those who haven't had a chance to use these tools yet. This has really been a fabulous way to operate. So I'm just going to play us out on. First of all, I want to mention that just next week we got another session coming up that is going to bring in Patrick Schumacher, for whom Tim was working for a while. Bring in Wan Yu He, bring in Ross Lovegrove, and many others. That's going to be, and the title is the AI Design Revolution. How, and the question is being asked, how is AI revolutionizing the way in which we're designing? And I think it clearly is, but hopefully it'll be as productive a session as today in terms of laying out the many ways in which it is happening. And we finish off with this emerging female voices in AI. One thing I'm challenged by often is that most of the figures, the Jeffrey Hintons or the Demis Hassabis or whatever, they're all male apart from Fei Li, to bring in. But I think in the future we're going to have a lot of female voices coming in there and taking charge of things. So we're going to finish off with emerging female voices in AI. But alongside all of this, we're also holding a series on a Sunday. Some of the sessions have been quite extraordinary in this thing. We're dealing with the question of artificial general intelligence. We're not dealing with the tools so much, but what's happening at a broader scale in terms of AI and how it's kind of matching or even surpassing human cognitive skills. And tomorrow we have Blaise Aguirre-Arcas, who is one of the central figures. Let me just simply say that he was the person who curated the first ever exhibition on AI generated art. He did a series of TED Talks, super famous TED Talks that were looking at things like deep dream and whatever in the early days. And then he set up a Google Artist Machine Intelligence group that was helping people like Refik Anadol. Of course, Refik's now a rock star, but it's big thanks to people like Blaise who have been bringing in their expertise and open this up. Tomorrow is going to be fascinating. Blaise is one of the people who thinks we've already reached AGI in the early stages. AGI, where basically machines are capable of matching humans at most economically valuable tasks. That is an extraordinary step that we're reaching, and Blaise is a proponent of that. Others maybe disagree, but Blaise's view is once you've got the Wright brothers developing the first plane, the rest is plain sailing, as it were, or plain flying. You realize you've got there. So that's extraordinary. Since we mentioned fashion earlier on, I want to play us out on a project that I did. I just playing around, playing around with things. I thought the problem with fashion catwalks is they're way too tame, way too tame. What happens if you have a feral catwalk, when you had models turning into werewolves, into wolves, and so on? And I'm putting this alongside the music of The Who and their particular project, the Mongolian band, and their project Wolf Totem. So look forward to catching up with you next week, and let's see The Who playing us out. Wolf Totem. Right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Pauline. Thank you.
Yes.
No idea what happened to Daniel, but never mind. That was a great discussion. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jason. That was one of the best sessions. It really picked up and got super interesting in terms of the questions. So thanks for joining us. It was
Thanks,
and
Neil.
it's good to have not
Thank
too
you very
long.
much.
Boom. Great. Thanks, Jason. Hope to see you back in the UK sometime, both of you. Okay. All right. I'm giving a
Okay.
lecture at the AA and Cambridge School in November. All right.
Fantastic.
Great.